We do this Global Briefing Series in order to help the Oklahoma State community understand the global trends, the challenges, the problems that the world faces. And we try to bring in esteemed speakers who really can give us an insight into the reality of some of the problems around the world. This year, I'm very glad that Dean Paul Tucholsky from the College of Engineering, Architecture, and Technology has partnered us with both of our global briefings. We did one last fall, if you were able to participate, on the challenges of rebuilding Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria. Tonight's discussion is focused on a very different part of the world, on China and its neighbors, all the way to Europe with the Belt and Road Initiative. I thank you for being here tonight. Now I'd like to welcome up Paul Tucholsky to introduce our speakers and the topic.
Thank you, Randy. It's really my honor to have you all here today. My class is over here. They're taking up all the seats. So, but we're on our way to Malaysia in a few weeks, and so we're very excited about the Belt and Road Initiative, or when we were in China, they called it One Belt, One Road. But this is rebuilding the Silk Road. It's really creating those trade routes again, both by land and marine. 65 countries or 68 countries are involved in this, building infrastructure. The Chinese are investing more than $1 trillion in this initiative, about $150 million a year for about 8 years. And they're building port facilities, railroads, harbors, creating economic trade zones in multiple countries and ports. And it'll take you from Korea, Vietnam, or Malaysia all the way through China to the Middle East. There's a route to Africa, to Greece, Italy, all the way to Germany and the ports of Belgium. And it even hits Moscow. One route hits Moscow. So when you really look at this kind of investment, the Chinese have really decided that, this is a huge connectivity between Asia and Europe, and it's an opportunity for them to improve their position in the world. So with us today, we have Tony Nash, is the CEO and founder of Complete Intelligence. It's a data technology firm that uses the world's largest proprietary artificial intelligence and machine learning platforms to forecast commodities, currencies, equity markets, and economics. Previously, Tony built and led the global research business for The Economist, the British publication, and the Asia consulting business, IHS. He's been a social entrepreneur, media entrepreneur, writer, consultant, and he's a public speaker as well, and that's really why we have him here today. So we're going to have him talk to us a little bit about the One Belt Initiative, and then afterwards, we will have our panelists, some other panelists here who have connectivity with this same initiative, and we'll be able to take some questions from them later. So, Tony, it's all yours.
Thank you. Thanks, Dean Tucholsky. It's really, really nice to be here. Thank you, Dean Tucholsky. Thank you. Thank you very much for having me here. I'm so grateful to be here. When Randy started talking to me about coming here a few months ago, I really kind of wondered what it would be about. I wondered who would come. I wondered who would be interested in being here. And Dean Kluver is, I've known him for years, and I think we're fans of each other, and we kind of trade off compliments. And it's just really nice to be here. One of the key things that Dean Kluver told me when he came to this job is about the heritage with USAID, between Oklahoma State and USAID. I was telling some of the students over here that USAID asked me to lead a project in Sri Lanka in 2006 and 7. If you know anything about Sri Lanka, you know it was in civil war at the time. And so we built a business on behalf of the US government in Sri Lanka in the middle of the Civil War. It was fascinating. So I have a huge appreciation for USAID, and I had no idea that OSU was kind of the starter of it. And it was just fantastic to learn that when Dean Kluver told me. So today, we're here to talk about the Belt and Road Initiative, formerly the One Belt, One Road Initiative. And I have really kind of gone through a journey with the Belt and Road. I've had moments where I'm probably the biggest fan of the Belt and Road Initiative. I've also had moments where I'm probably one of the biggest skeptics of the Belt and Road Initiative. So, and I think that's probably about where we should be. I think it's a massive initiative. I think it is one that it's incredibly audacious and borders on unbelievable. But if it happens, and if it happens even a portion of what's been outlined, it's incredibly beneficial and will lift hundreds of millions of people out of poverty. And this is something that we can't forget is China, over the last 50 years, has lifted more people out of poverty in a shorter period of time than any government on earth, okay? And they've taken that view to building out hard and soft infrastructure really around the world, okay? And you'll see as we talk about the development of Belt and Road and some of the more recent actions and undertakings that's really come to be much more comprehensive than what's talked about simply between China and Europe, okay? But before we start, we really need to look at what is our China bias, okay? Everyone has a view on China, okay? And what is our view on President Xi, okay? Xi Jinping is the president of China, and is he Steve Jobs? Maybe. Very innovative, very dynamic. There is a cult of Xi Jinping in China, and we can talk at length about that. Is he Emperor Palpatine? I think there are a lot of people in the US who may actually think he's Emperor Palpatine. That can be really not helpful at times, okay? Whether or not you endorse what he's doing, his worldview, taking the adversarial view of Xi Jinping in many ways just isn't helpful, okay? Or is he JFK, okay? And the reason I picked out JFK is because JFK put out this big vision of going to the moon, okay? And at the time, it really seemed impossible. And within a few years, the US was there, okay? And so I think the analogy is with the Belt and Road that at the time that Xi Jinping started talking about the Belt and Road, I don't think many people took him seriously. I don't think it was as audacious as a moonshot. It was something that was just impossible for a place like China to do. And so when he did this, I think he knew more about China's trajectory than many people thought. So if we look at where China is today, okay, right here, I know these are small, and you guys can have these slides. I've got lots of citations in the slides and everything, so you can check out everything I'm saying to make sure you know I'm not lying to you. But China's position right now, this top slide here is looking at world trade. Okay, so China is the largest trading nation in the world. It overtook the U.S. About 5 years ago, actually in 2011. Okay, right here we're looking at military spending. Okay, this is Chinese military spending against Japanese and Korean military spending. So China spends more on military than most countries in Asia combined. So it is very much a rising power, not just in terms of trade, not just economically, not just in terms of diplomacy, but also militarily, okay? Now, where China is spending about $250 billion, the US, I think, is about 4 times that. I can't remember the number that the US spends, but I think it's 3 to 4 times that. Now, the last one is looking at China's growth, and this is really what the origins of China's growth, and this is really what brings on the Belt and Road Initiative, okay? So if we look here, the blue line is consumption, okay? And the red line is investment. So this is investment in the Chinese economy, okay? Now, I'm sure you've heard, if you know anything about the economic history of China, you've heard that it's an investment-led economy. They invest in a lot of roads and ports and bridges and buildings and all sorts of stuff. First of all, to mobilize people and keep people at work, okay? Because they need to keep unemployment low or risk social issues, okay? They also needed to mobilize capital because they were this big exporting country that didn't import a lot, okay, in a relative sense. And so, so they had to use that capital somehow, and they used it to build out infrastructure for their people. The other part of it is there wasn't a lot of infrastructure, right? And so China had to build out everything from scratch. And, well, they had infrastructure from, 60 years before, but everything needed to be improved, okay? We've also heard since about 2004 about how China needed to turn into a consumption-based economy. And economists, many skeptical economists always said, look, this is never going to happen. They can't transition to a consumption-based economy. They'll continue to be an investment-based economy, and they'll never use the assets that they've built, okay? What's happened is, and what we've seen is, as of, let's say about 2014, consumption really started taking over in the Chinese economy, okay? So if we look at things like wages, Chinese manufacturing wages are about on the level of Malaysia or even Mexico, okay? So Chinese are not, it's not a low-cost origin anymore. It's a, I would say, a middle-cost origin of places, a middle-cost manufacturing location. So as you've had, pardon me, as you've had wage rises, you've had a rise of consumption. Good evening. Now, you've also had things like credit growth and other growth in China. I don't know if you've been to China. When I'm in China and I go to a restaurant and I pay in cash, I'm the only one who does that, okay? Do you guys know what WeChat is? Does anybody use WeChat who's not Chinese? Okay. So WeChat is, does anybody know what WhatsApp is? Okay, so it's similar to WhatsApp, but it's a whole lot more functional, okay? I know Chinese people who have their whole life on WeChat, right? So, but you can pay for everything through WeChat. It's connected to your bank account. And so when I go into a restaurant, most of the other people eating there are paying through WeChat. They're not paying with a credit card. They're not paying with, or Alipay or something like that. Do you know Alibaba? Have you guys ever heard of Alibaba? Okay, Alibaba, Alipay, it's another business line that they have. So people are paying with WeChat Pay or Alipay or something. Nobody handles cash in China anymore. Nobody. No Chinese person, okay? Foreigners do, some Chinese people do, and most of the Chinese people I know don't use credit cards. They use Alipay and WeChat Pay, okay? And so those things have grown as we've had consumption take off, okay? All of this is good news for China's domestic economy, but all the guys who are doing this investment stuff, construction workers, engineering firms, all those guys, they've got to do something, right? So if infrastructure build out in China is declining, where are they going to go? They're going to go overseas, right? So what's better than a big visionary program to build infrastructure overseas? And so we get the Belt and Road Initiative. So in 2013, China's President Xi Jinping went to Kazakhstan and gave a speech talking about bringing Central Asia and China together and reinvigorating the old Silk Road, okay? I remember when this speech was given, and if anybody is a China watcher and not Chinese, I don't mean to make fun of you guys, but if you're a China watcher, you have to read the words, you have to read the speeches, you have to understand what's being said. Don't just read the headline from the Financial Times or the Wall Street Journal or whatever. You have to really understand what's being said. And what he said in 2013 are things like, a nearby neighbor is better than a distant relative, okay? He talked about the number of people in that area that the Belt and Road would reach, okay? So at this time in 2013, the Belt and Road was only for nearby countries. It was really a focus on the region around China, okay? So as you see the Belt and Road grow, as you see the expansion to Africa, to Europe, to Latin America even, I've been told it now includes Latin America, you have to really remember the origins of this, okay? The Belt and Road is really about China consolidating relationships in its neighborhood, okay? Europe is helpful, okay? Africa is helpful, Latin America is helpful, but it really is about China exerting control and influence in its neighborhood, okay? And that's a really, really important thing to remember. He also talked about things like trading in local currencies. I'm not going to talk about transportation networks because I know you are, but he also talked about trading in local currencies. So if you had told people back in 2013 that China wanted to do international trade in Chinese yuan, they would have kind of laughed at you, okay? But increasingly, there are more contracts nominated in the Chinese currency. There are more construction efforts that are becoming in Chinese currency. There are not many yet, but we're starting to see more and more of that, okay? You're starting to see things like crude oil contracts written in the Chinese currency. So a lot of this really started in 2013 with the initial Belt and Road discussion. Okay, so from that Central Asian discussion, we've got this, which is a pan-Eurasian vision, okay? But it also includes parts of Africa, okay? Now, also keep in mind, in the 1990s, early 2000s, China was doing a lot of work in this part of Africa, okay, and in this part of Africa. So the African vision is not necessarily unique to the Belt and Road. The African vision is kind of a continuation of earlier programs where they wanted to consolidate relationships with the so-called Old Third World, which was kind of the first world was US relationships, second world was Russian relationships, third world was Chinese relationships. And so they wanted to consolidate those relationships. So the African extension of the Belt and Road is a continuation of that, pardon me, of that China-Africa relationship that was really started in the 90s, even earlier than that politically, but from an infrastructure program in the 90s and 2000s. Now, in 2015, I spent about a year advising an agency within the Chinese government called the NDRC, the National Development and Reform Commission. It wasn't a paid position, it was a voluntary position, but I did it because I wanted a view, an insider's view of what was happening with the Belt and Road, okay? Not many people had heard about it at that time outside of China. And I saw a lot. As far as I know, I'm the only American who's had that level of access, and it was amazing to see what was going on inside of the Chinese bureaucracy around the Belt and Road. At that time, I was told that there were 31 Belt and Road projects underway just in Zimbabwe, okay? Now, what you come to learn about Belt and Road is if it's convenient, a project will be swept into Belt and Road. If it's not convenient, it'll be pushed off to something else, okay? So what that told me is China had some larger, some smaller projects in Zimbabwe, but they wanted to tally up a lot of activity in a place like Zimbabwe to consolidate, their relationships there. And so you find that as a part of it. What also happened in 2015 is you see this, the second bullet point here is Pakistan. China announced a $46 billion investment in Pakistan, which is the largest single country investment under the Belt and Road Initiative. That was done for political reasons, it was done for development reasons, it was done for a lot of reasons, and it's had varying degrees of success. China has their own private army, their own division of the Pakistani army within Pakistan to guard their workers and other things. So the Pakistan relationship is probably the deepest of any of the Belt and Road countries. You'll hear a lot about Sri Lanka around the Belt and Road with ports and other things. I was in Sri Lanka in 2016, and you hear a lot about resentment between Sri Lanka and China around the Belt and Road. I have to tell you, I didn't see any of that, okay? So I think generally a number of these relationships are fairly positive, although there are exceptions, and I think those exceptions are becoming more common, unfortunately. So any questions so far? Jump in anytime. If you guys have any questions or thoughts, please jump in anytime, okay? Now, the bill that the Belt and Road is trying to fill is a big one. The Asian Development Bank came out with a study in 2008, I believe, that said that Asia needed $8 trillion of infrastructure spend, okay? Now, when I have spoken with the various officials within the Chinese government, I've heard anything between $500 billion to $1 trillion to $6 trillion. I had somebody in the DC embassy in China tell me that they would be spending $6 trillion on the Belt and Road. I find that unbelievable. I think the consensus figure now is $1 trillion. Now, if you look at the institutional money that's behind this, so BRI here is Belt and Road Initiative, okay? CIC is China Investment Corporation. That's China's sovereign wealth fund. So it's about a $200 billion fund, okay? AIIB is the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, which is a new multilateral bank based in Beijing. So they'll have about $100 billion, okay? They don't have it yet, but they'll have about $100 billion. There's another bank called the BRICS Bank, which is loosely based in India, but it's managed out of China. That should be another $100 billion, and so on and so forth, okay? Now, the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, I have CAS, I think it's CASS, they estimated the economic impact to be between $5 and $7 trillion, okay? So when you look at, and this is where I'll get very nerdy economist, when you look at the multiplier of infrastructure investment, it's usually about 1.8 times the amount spent, okay? So that means you're really planning to spend about $3 trillion on the Belt and Road Initiative, okay? Now, the Belt and Road Initiative has brought a lot of competition from other players, okay? The Asian Development Bank now has a renewed interest in infrastructure in Asia. The World Bank has a renewed interest in infrastructure in Asia. Japan has announced a new infrastructure fund for about $110 billion. So whether or not China hits $1 trillion or $6 trillion, I think honestly is irrelevant, okay? The fact is they're creating a buzz around infrastructure investment in Asia, okay? There are only so many talented workers who can work on this stuff. There is only so much steel, there are only so many materials that can go into this. So what China has done is create a real focal point on the need for infrastructure in Asia, and that's a very good thing. And I guess the real key here, OPM, is other people's money, okay? So a big problem that the Chinese government is having is when they go into a country to build an asset, they find that, let's say it's a $10 billion project, they'll come with their $5 billion, but the other country doesn't have $5 billion to put in, okay? So they've got to find other people's money to invest in this. And you've had some instances like there's a high-speed rail in Jakarta that is set to be built, okay? I think that's a $6 billion project. The Indonesians didn't want to come with money to build the high-speed rail, so the Chinese had to take an equity stake in that asset, okay? The Chinese government doesn't want to own this stuff. They want to build good infrastructure, and they want to pass it on to the local governments. But they're finding that local governments increasingly cannot come to the table with cash. And if they can't come to the table with cash, and they're not creditworthy, or they don't want to take a note, or take out debt, then the Chinese government has to take an equity stake. They have to take ownership in rail, in ports, in all of these things they're building out. So this is the dilemma and part of the limit that the Belt and Road Initiative is finding, okay? They cannot get the other parties to come to the table with money. They find that they're having to run these assets, not build them. So a plan that was put in place so that they can mobilize construction and engineering workers overseas is now turning into a financial project, right? It's turning into an operational project. It's turning into a lot of risk, actually. So they wanted to mobilize workers. Now they're trying to manage risk. And that's a big problem. That's an extension over what they really wanted to do initially, okay? And the other part, key element, I don't know if you can see this, but I like this picture. It's at a store where you buy beer, right? And it says, you wouldn't carry a baby with one hand, would you? Why treat your beer differently, okay? And then the note there says, don't you tell me how to carry my baby, okay? And so, the Chinese government doesn't want to be told by other people how to run their projects, okay? And a big part of the Belt and Road Initiative are things like transparency, are things like good governance, tendering, corruption, and so on and so forth. Now, we have very good anti-corruption methods developed in other multilateral institutions like the World Bank, ADB, IMF, other places. But the Chinese government wants to do it their own way, okay? They want to hold their baby how they want to hold their baby. And it's a problem. And part of the focus that I had when I was advising the NDRC is I would sit down with people and I would say, how much money are you comfortable losing to corruption, okay? So let's say you have $1 trillion program. Are you comfortable losing 5% to corruption? Are you comfortable losing 20% to corruption? Are you comfortable losing 30% to corruption or more, okay? In a place like Pakistan, 30%, easy, okay? A number of these other countries, 20, 30%, easy. You can easily lose that stuff to corruption, okay? So I know that the AIIB is working on anti-corruption measures, but the early Belt and Road projects have had real problems with corruption, real problems with money disappearing, real problems with bad planning, okay? So these are some of the real issues that that the Belt and Road is facing, and these are things that had they listened to other people early on, they wouldn't be facing these issues, okay? But they wanted to do it their way, and they're now encountering that, okay? Now, I guess a few years in, we're 5 years into the Belt and Road from the 2013 announcement, and the real question is whether it's being realized, okay? Now, a great example of a Belt and Road project that's working is in Nepal, okay? In Nepal, they grow ginger, okay? And if you hear any Belt and Road speakers, a lot of people talk about this project, but it's a real project. In Nepal, they grow ginger, and they could only sell ginger to India, okay? Because there was no other transportation access out of the country. Because they sold it to India and it was a captive market, they would have to sell it at below market rates. So Nepalese farmers who farmed ginger were making not very much money, and they were very poor. The Chinese came in and built a railroad into Nepal, and Chinese growers now have many markets they can sell their ginger into, okay? So they're now selling their ginger at a market rate, and they're making a lot more money, right? So that's a real tangible application of the Belt and Road working, right? They're giving these growers more options, they're making more money, and everyone's happier except for the Indian guys who are buying it below market, okay? So I think in a number of ways the Belt and Road is working, but we have some problems. So what was said earlier about, let's say this is $1 trillion program and it's being distributed over 8 years, they have to spend $120 million a year, okay? So overseas, ODI, overseas direct investment out of China in 2017 was $16 billion, okay? That's all it was, so a tenth of what they need to spend. That's up marginally from 2016. It's up 8% from 2016. So in 2016, they spent about $12 billion, okay? So this includes the Belt and Road projects. So China can't transmit the money into the countries fast enough because they're spending a tenth or less of what they need to spend to sustain and get momentum behind the Belt and Road project. So it's starting much more slowly than many people wanted it to start, okay? You also get things like white elephants. So there's a port in southern Sri Lanka that cost the Chinese government $1 billion, and they're operating it. And they did it in this grandiose way to do a favor to the Sri Lankan government, but actually no ships are calling there, okay? It's an empty white elephant $1 billion port that nobody wants to visit. You have potential for canceled high-profile projects. So the Jakarta high-speed rail that is slated to start in 2019, the Indonesian government is now talking about canceling that project, because when the Chinese government went in to start that project, they didn't have the proper land permits to build out the rail, okay? And the Indonesian government cannot force farmers to sell their land. So the Chinese want to spend $6 billion. They want to build a railway, but the farmers won't sell their land, so they can't put tracks down. Okay, there are other issues too, but that's the biggest one. Land use is the biggest issue. So if there was a $6 billion project canceled in Indonesia that is probably their highest visibility project in Indonesia, it would really take away the credibility of the Belt and Road in Southeast Asia, or it would at least start to erode the credibility of the Belt and Road in Southeast Asia. Okay, and then finally you have things like corruption and tax evasion. So the Port of Piraeus in Greece, which the Chinese government runs, a Chinese government-owned company runs, that company is being accused of tax evasion by EU officials, and that port is also seen as a distribution port for counterfeit goods and other things. So there's a fair bit of negative PR that's starting to appear around the Belt and Road Initiative. So yes, it's being realized, and what you see down the right-hand side of this are some projects that are underway, but there are some real issues with these projects, with a number of projects as well, okay? And we also look at kind of hopes and fears for future projects. How are we doing on time?
5 more minutes.
Perfect, okay. We also have hopes and fears for future projects. So just 2 weeks ago, the Chinese government announced an equivalent of USAID, okay? So they're gonna have this agency go out and help communities, especially in countries where they're building out Belt and Road projects. So let's say places like Myanmar, places like Western Africa, so on and so forth. They wanna focus those assets or those resources to help the communities around Belt and Road projects, okay? So that's a good thing, right? But you also have the downside and questions around, will China become an occupier of these countries where it's doing these projects? So one of the Chinese military officials 2 weeks ago said that they would be happy to dispatch troops to Pakistan to protect their workers if needed, okay? So there are some real sovereignty issues around, will China start dispatching its troops to protect its projects? And that has some people nervous. You also have 27 of the 28 EU leaders who signed a letter protesting the approach of Belt and Road projects, saying that basically that China is bullying European countries into taking Belt and Road projects, okay, and the terms around those projects. So a lot of the fears that people have around Belt and Road, you can find evidence in certain ways, okay? It doesn't mean all projects are bad. In fact, there are some very good projects, but there are enough incidences of unfavorable activity that people are starting to build a case against Chinese involvement and against the Belt and Road, okay? Yet you still have optimists like New Zealand, okay? And one of the New Zealand ministers said, the Belt and Road Initiative will not require us to surrender our sovereignty or our independent foreign policy. But you have to question, why would he say that in the first place, right? If he's making that statement, obviously somebody thinks that that's in danger, okay? So there are real concerns around China's looming presence around these projects. And so I guess the real question remains, will the Belt and Road be true to the principle that was announced in 2013? Will they treat their close friends like family? Will they develop in a positive way? Will they develop those ancient routes where wealth can be created, where ideas can be exchanged, and where China can mobilize its workforce and keep unemployment low? It's a real question. So, in 2017, May 2017, there was a big Belt and Road meeting in Beijing, and all the speeches were very favorable and everyone was very hopeful, okay? But things have kind of fallen flat. So I think China has some real work to do. The NDRC, the ministries associated with the Belt and Road have some real work to do to really make sure that their institutions can deliver on what's needed to have a successful program, but also so their partner countries and their beneficiary countries really understand their own role and how they can best partner with China. So thanks very much.
We thought what we'd do right now is just have a little panel discussion against, or not against anything, but to talk a little bit more about the broader aspects of this. And so With Tony, we have Josh Lee. Raise your hand, Josh. Okay. Josh is a professor of civil engineering with an expertise in transportation infrastructure here at OSU. Steve Wanger. Raise your hand so they can see you. Okay. He's an associate professor in higher education administration. He's also the Don and Kathy Humphreys Endowed Chair, something I share with you. And he's also one of the, for the international school here, International Studies. His research explores these international issues in higher education. And we have Tong Wu, a Ph.D. student from Beijing. He's at OSU here, but he grew up in Beijing, and he's in the College of Education, Health, and Aviation. So with that, I'm happy to actually allow you to ask questions of anybody on the panel. So, oh, you have presentations, okay. Who has a presentation? Josh? Come on up, Josh.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. It's a great honor here. And I am totally a technical person, so I want to share some of my observations on the challenges and opportunities of One Belt, One Road from a technical perspective. So Mr. Nash has provided a great introduction of this map. So this map generally is going to construct 6 economic zones in the land. In the ocean, that's primarily the waterways and the ports. So by 2017, this number from the website, probably this number is much lower than what has been advertised several years ago. Planned by the 2017, so around $1 trillion of investment of infrastructure, projected in $2.5 trillion by 2025. So the major types of infrastructure includes the transportation, which primarily roads, railway, ports, and also energy-related infrastructure, also the telecommunication, which is the cyber infrastructure, and some industrial projects. Most of the OBOR projects are mega projects, cross borders and several $1 billion projects. So most of the mega projects generally have 4 types of big challenges. So right here tonight, I'm only going to talk about the first one and the last one, tied to the technical part. So the first challenge, when I prepared this presentation, the first one come to my mind is the unified standard. So around the OBOR countries, there are 65 of them. So no single country is using the same standard. There are different standards. For example, if you go to Lowe's, you got different kind of stuff. So you don't know, you cannot predict what you're going to get. This is a big challenge. And since the OBOR, China is taking the lead of this. The Chinese specifications, a lot of times they're very different from other specifications used in the world. Without a unified specification, so the operation, maintenance can never be integrated or optimized. That's number one. A second point for this is the standardized cross-border, the management and collaboration practices is lacking. For example, the train from China to UK has been launched several years ago, like a year ago, 2017, I think. But there are so much work we still need to be done to improve the transportation efficiency and also to reduce the cost. On this map, you can see why they want this kind of initiative. In the west and the north part of the country is huge mountains. The highest mountain is somewhere right here between China and Nepal. And also a lot of deserts. So when we build this kind of infrastructure, all different kinds of challenges they are facing in this kind of process. So these are some examples that's very common in the west part of China. You have huge mountains with steep and unstable slopes. We have thousands of miles of deserts, nothing, no vegetation, but sandstorms. So the Tibet, so have the permafrost, and that is very unique. There's no second place. It's like this. And also the soft clay foundations in the Southeast Asia. That's a big problem too. How to design, construct, and maintain this infrastructure. So it's very challenging and it will cost a lot of money. How to protect the fragile environments for the sustainable development is a second challenge. And there are many stories on this. So I just used the Tibetan permafrost as an example. Before I came to US, I worked in Tibet for the first engineering class at the University of Tibet for 1 semester. So I had some field experience with that. With the climate change and also the interruption of the surface, so the permafrost will degrade, which will lead to the infrastructure maintenance and repair, sometimes even failure. In order to protect the permafrost from melting, and there are many passive cooling methodologies have been tested and implemented on the railway from inland China to Tibet. So there are some examples like the sunshade. Some of them look silly, but it's real in the real project. Some of them using the foaming boards to try to separate the heat. And there are some air ducts. This one is not covered from engineering, you probably, because this is 3 feet above the ground. It's not for drain water. So this is trying to cool down the embankments of the infrastructure. And also there are air convection embankments, some heat drains. This has been very successfully used in these projects to try to protect the permafrost. Of course, they're very expensive as well. A lot of times, they're just simply using bridges in dry land. There's no water right here. What they use right here is to disturb the surface less. Or second purpose for this, they provide a corridor for the wildlife so that they can cross during the migration. Another challenge. So if you look at the figure in your left, that's a major seismic zones. So the OBOR routes follow all of those. And the second, most of the OBOR countries, so they have high risks of terrorist threats. And most of them are developed countries. How to protect the critical infrastructure out there and enhance the resiliency of them. And to develop how to react during emergency or disaster. That is a big, huge task. With fast construction of this infrastructure, efficient and effective monitoring technologies will be critical too. So this is very critical for the safety operation and optimized decision making. Because there are thousands of miles infrastructure need inspection. So this health monitoring techniques has to be non-destructive, high speed, and also reliable at the different conditions. This slide gives some examples of this kind of techniques. Many of them you may be familiar with, okay, such as laser imaging for the high speed for the surface, ground penetrating radar, and also the high speed rail inspection car, UAV for hard to reach inspection locations, and the LiDAR, and some safety instruments all among this list. Some of them are mature than others, and many of them still need your contribution, the folks right here, to work on in the very near future. There's a huge problem regarding the high-speed rail. They're developing so fast, but there's no efficient way to monitor whether they have some issues or not. So if there's some kind of thing happen, the problem will be huge, will be hundreds of people's life. It's so fast. In the ocean, so we can see on the freight movement, so our waterways are very busy and congested, especially at some of the choke points. So the black dots right here. So under this kind of situation, so the port logistics and the supply chain management is very important for the safety and also for the business. In the era of climate change, sea level rise and extreme weather has already showed the impact on the coastal, port, and waterway infrastructure. Most recently, the super-sized 53-feet container are common both in US, in China, and many places. But our old infrastructure, existing ones, are designed and built based on 20 feet and 40 feet containers. So all the carriers, ports, and the terminals, and the related freight fleet ready to take the move or not. So this is something not clear. And also it's very exciting to find it out. OBOR also include smart cities and smart infrastructure involved in this initiative. So this development will require the most advanced techniques in artificial intelligence and big data analytics. Mr. Nash is the expert in this area. And there are some other implications. I think I'm probably running out of time, okay? So I'm not going to talk about this. Construction management and delivery, this is the big thing. It's a very big thing. All the mega projects, almost nobody is on time and on budget. So this is the big one, especially if you go to another country with unstable situations. This is going to be a big issue. Mr. Nash also mentioned about this. In the beginning, they want to transfer this to the local government, but they don't have the cash on the table. And then they turn out to need to operate all of those. And you need to comply with the law and many cultural things. This could be a big challenge. Another thing I didn't put on the slide is the infrastructure financing. In the beginning, it was like 160 billion or something, but it's only 12 billion. So the financing is a big part for this. What you guys have learned in this side, you learn in class, are all addressing all these challenges. I think you will use your knowledge someday, very soon in the future, even before you know it. And also OSU has a long history of international engagement with a global impact. I went to the OSU Global Studies website, the 33 MOU between OSU and Chinese universities. 8 of them are from SIT. Each year we have students from these universities study at OSU. So I'm challenging you to interact with them, take the opportunity, interact with them, and identify the opportunities that leads to the future. Of course, there's no doubt, this kind of initiative, there's a lot of risks. But just as this Chinese phrase, which stands for risk, there are 2 letters. So it tells us risk is a time of danger and also a time of opportunity. Okay, I hope this short talk will give you some insights. Thank you very much.
I did not prepare a PowerPoint, and I will keep my comments brief, but the intent of the comments are to connect the Belt Road Initiative with potential implications in education, particularly higher education. And I want to emphasize a couple of things on the front end. First of all, I think there are both long-term and short-term potential implications. In terms of long-term, let me start there. The long-term goes back to what Mr. Nash indicated in terms of the Belt Road Initiative potentially increasing or bringing significant numbers, millions, hundreds of millions of people out of poverty. Historically, when people move out of poverty, they tend to seek education, higher education, etc. So long-term, one of the great connections is there. Short-term, there is a connection with really what is occurring across the globe in terms of regional global initiatives. When you look across the globe, with the exception of North America, you see regional initiatives that are aimed to harmonize or integrate higher education with the intent that students and faculty can go across borders and take classes, travel, teach, etc. Behind that is economic development, much of what we're talking about here. You see those regional initiatives starting in Europe with the Bologna process in 1999. Much of the rest of the world has followed that. Africa in 2008 with the Tuning Project, Latin America and the Caribbean in 2008 also, the Arab Gulf Coast with the Gulf Cooperation Council in 2012, Southeast Asia with the Association of Southeast Asian Nations and ASEAN University Network in 2015, and even ASEAN Plus 3, which includes Japan, South Korea, and China. Much of my work over the last couple of years has been working with colleagues, research colleagues in both Vietnam and Thailand, looking at that regional integration process, particularly from a policy standpoint and a leadership standpoint in Southeast Asia. What we potentially see is that Belt Road can supplant that or replace that and fold in the global regional harmonization across the globe. We saw the pictures earlier, the map earlier, of how extensive that is. So from just a potential standpoint, we are talking about potentially the bigger one. Okay. The potential to harmonize higher education in terms of a system or multiple systems across much of the globe, with the exception of North America. I think some of the other implications with higher education certainly are the growing global trend of tapping higher education for economic development. So as we potentially move away from higher education being about training and educated citizenry to preparing individuals for economic development, tapping higher ed for national economic development, those are significant potentials. I think there also is a very significant potential for the U.S. If regional harmonization initiatives gain traction, and currently they seem to be stalling, but if they gain traction, where does that leave the U.S.? For 40, 50 years, we have seen much of our economic development in some sense springing from individuals who come to the U.S. and stay and reside. If that trend is reversed, what does it say for our economic development, for our connections across the globe? I think that's the main thing that I would end with is two words. If, there are a lot of ifs here, and potential. Potential opportunities, potential barriers. In terms of OSU, I think the great opportunity here is a potential. Potential, and I would argue even the need for multidisciplinary, transnational research collaborations and research teams that look at Belt Road not from just an economic standpoint or a geopolitical standpoint, but an amalgam of geopolitical, economic development, higher education, etc. I think that's the greatest opportunity, and my hope is that OSU can be at the forefront of that in the coming days. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My talk will be divided into two parts. So first, I would like to briefly introduce the current research on the One Belt One Road in the US universities. I choose two representative samples to introduce. The first sample is Big 12. I want to ask you a question. Do you know how many One Belt One Road topic research papers or report have been published in Big 12? You can guess. How many? Zero. Yes, none. Yeah, I went to each school's website one by one and tried to find relevant published articles. Unfortunately, I didn't find anything. But OSU is ahead of the other 11 because I found one flyer which is about One Belt One Road topic. It's today's flyer. And then I shift to another set of examples, samples Ivy League. And I will ask you the same question. Do you know how many One Belt One Road topic research papers or reports have been published in Ivy League? 2? You can guess. One more time. Okay. The number is too large, too willingness to statistic. And the different kind of forum and subject groups haven't been calculated yet. So an interesting phenomenon. The higher global ranking universities pay more attention to One Belt One Road research. And the similar situation can also be found in European universities. This is an interesting phenomenon and worth thinking about why. And for second part, I also want to say this is an opportunity for OSU, especially in terms of enhancing global impact. I believe most of professors in this room have experience of international cooperations. For a university, if the university ranking can be seen as a hard indicator, and then how is its soft power measured? International impact is a good indicator, but it's hard to quantify. For OSU, we can accept that you don't understand scientific research we have created, but we cannot accept that you have never heard our name. With the development of globalization, most top universities' names have become world brand. The international reputations and the influence are main factors to support this brand. The university cooperation model only for the purpose of enrollment is leaving us. And the upgrading cooperation model is quietly coming. The brand cooperation will be one of the trends in the future. And the foundation for the brand cooperation must be influential. This kind of cooperation will extend to many fields. Academic research will be a very important part, but it will not be all. This trend is spreading around the world. I will set an Asian middle school as an example. It uses mergers and acquisitions, alliances, and other ways to integrate education resources within the region, and then establish a brand education group. After that, to seek cooperation in teaching, resourcing, and other aspects in the form of group. There, similar example also occur in the development and establishment of university groups. Therefore, in order to survive the fierce competitions in the future, everyone is working hard to improve regional influence and initiative as soon as possible. For OSU, the One Belt One Road may be an opportunity to increase global impact, not only in China, but in Asia, in Africa, and in Europe. The external basic conditions for enhancing impact and visibility are to have audience. And it is that come along in the One Belt One Road. 67 countries in Asia, Africa, and Europe bring more than 4.4 billion in demographic dividends. The proportion of the population counts for about 63% of the global population, and the total economic output accounts for about 30% of global. I think it is hard to find other event that can bring so much attention currently. Even President Trump's Twitter has only 50 million followers. So if we can use this new period hotspot to further promote and deepen cooperation while breaking the bottleneck of traditional international cooperation and further enhance the impact and the presences of OSU in Asia, Africa, and Europe. Examples for improving their influence through the One Belt, One Road initiative can also be found in American universities. I will set an example, Columbia University. It once organized a forum on the One Belt, One Road topic in the US with a Chinese partner institute. Through media report, it's believed that millions of Chinese people began to know Columbia University through this opportunity. And it's worth noting that not only Chinese media channels report on this news, but a large number of European and Asian media channels have also participated in the reporting and forwarding. So, who can imagine how many potential resource opportunity, funding opportunity, cooperation opportunity will be brought to Columbia University? In fact, a similar example can also be found at OSU, like the new Joint Research Center just mentioned by Dr. Wanger. School of Education signed an agreement with University of Science and Technology Beijing to build the Joint Research Center together, and made a cursory statistic. More than 3 media channels report this event and it differs to all of the country. So we can imagine how many opportunities will bring to OSU in the future. That is based on the cooperation program. Many of our colleges has cooperate partnership in China, and most of our agreement is only focused on recruiting students. There is no deeper cooperation between OSU and them. I'm thinking, is it possible for us to use joint research as a starting point for deeper cooperation? One Belt, One Road may be a good bridge to connect with each other. At last, Mr. Nash's intelligent company gave me some inspirations. So big data and cloud computing are making earlier effort for the future shared society and a borderless world. So can OSU be able to use the One Belt, One Road as an opportunity to advance lay out its future global impact? This is a question for us. The importance of global impact not only reflects the future international cooperation, but also reflect the vitality of OSU. We have a lot of research to discuss the sustainable development issue in the certain area, such as sustainable development of water, sustainable development of agricultural product. But have we noticed the sustainable development issue of this university? I believe that global and regional impact will be a very important factor to promote the future sustainable development of OSU. Therefore, I would like to repeat the question again. So if OSU is able to use One Belt, One Road as a starting point to lay out our global impact from today. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for all of this. This is a great presentation. Just, I'm looking at the updates for today, and she met with Modi today to talk about this One Belt, One Road and their agreement in Pakistan. Well, the Pakistanis want to build this road, and the Chinese want to build the road through Kashmir. Well, guess what? India doesn't believe Kashmir belongs to Pakistan, and so Modi didn't agree to it. So the agreement between Pakistan and China is right now on hold until Modi visits China again, and they may have another discussion. But the chance that India and Pakistan are going to agree to build a road through Kashmir is pretty skinny. When we look at the size of investment, people try to think about what is $1 trillion? Okay, is it a number that we can get our hands on? Okay, it is, absolutely. The interstate highway system in the United States, if we had to rebuild it, would cost us more than $1 trillion, just in the United States, just the interstate, the I system. It would cost us about $50 to $70 billion just to pave it with a 3-inch topping of asphalt. All right, so the size of infrastructure investment we need in this country is probably on the order of $3 to $5 trillion. So their investment is in an infrastructure that will pay off is important. And I think we heard from Mr. Nash today also that if those countries can't afford to maintain them, if you build a port and no one uses it, it's a waste of money, because within a few years the cranes won't work. If a crane doesn't operate, 5 years from now, it'll never operate. It needs to be maintained every day. If a road doesn't get used, believe it or not, it turns back into a desert. And so all of those kind of investments are really tough. So, but, you know, that said, if you can make trade work with this kind of route, it could be a game changer for the world. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions that we might have. Do we need to pass the mic around? All right. Any questions?
Are there any interest in Latin America with the railway system? Because I know there's one country in South America which doesn't require visas for Chinese nationals to go into South America, which is Ecuador. So could they, I don't know, use that opportunity to increase their economic interest or transportation interest in the continent?
Absolutely. There's a lot of interest in Latin America. So I would say back in 2015, they really started talking about expanding this out to Latin America. It doesn't conveniently fit on that map that all the think tanks put together, but there's a lot of interest in Latin America. Partly because if you look at trade, there's a lot of interest. You have to follow trade and see where trade flows go, okay? And that's where a lot of the Chinese interest is. Okay, and so certainly between China and Latin America, there's a huge amount of interest.
Right here, Wes.
Go ahead, lady.
Go ahead.
This is for Speaker Lee. You were talking about the problems with the permafrost in the Mongolian area. Well, I know from personal experience they had a lot of trouble with the permafrost in Alaska and Canada during World War II. If they were able to overcome that back in the 40s, why is it such a problem now, 80 years later?
Tibetan is very unique because of the high elevation. The picture I have is around 20,000 feet. So that is a big problem. So the solutions in Alaska and Canada, part of that can be applied to Tibet, but many of them does not apply because of the really high elevation. And also their wildlife out there is quite unique. It's only there. There's nobody else got this kind of wildlife.
And I would say also that the Canadians and the Alaskans wouldn't say that permafrost is solved either. They lose roads and just go away in a couple of years sometimes. So trying to keep, especially now we have warming going on, that undercarriage of those roads that we built just 15 years ago is undermined. It's only good only a certain portion of the year now.
But they do have, I think the colloquial term for it is floating roads.
Right. But you can't really make a railroad on a floating bed. It's too heavy. So you can do trucks and cars maybe, but not even big trucks. Cars are easy enough to go on the floating roads. Yeah. Other questions?
Comment.
Go ahead. So
I was just wondering about the infrastructure of the railroads and roads, and I describe it as a line. but I'm really interested about the point, which is the cities and urbanization of those cities where this road will potentially develop even further. And so either Mr. Nash or Professor Lee can kind of discuss or have any thought on urbanization of these cities, kind of strategic, I guess, cities from China to Europe. And I mean, the problem, the economical problem, probably only can solve based on this urbanization or population. So that kind of engine for make this large infrastructural plan works. And so if you have any thought on the potential urbanization of the certain cities, or maybe that kind of lead into some sort of.
Right. So for maybe people, we're urban planning people, but if you have a train stop, a city starts building around it.
Sure.
If you unload freight, all of a sudden the city starts up, and you got a problem. I mean, you have to accommodate that. Comments?
Go first, please.
And so I think these are two parts. The first part is the infrastructure to Europe. That part, you already have the infrastructure right there, but only because cross the borders. So there are some obstacles right there. That is not a big problem. The only problem is to improve the efficiency and reduce cost to work seamlessly. The second part is maybe like Pakistan and some other locations. The infrastructure simply are not there. So I believe right now, all the projects right now are collecting mega cities in between. So they're not going to build something to a place of nowhere. So I'm not sure whether exactly answer your question or not.
Well, I just wondering about the impact. Like, I think there is potentially pretty significant impact on the city, not like Beijing or Shanghai, but other mid-sized or smaller town become potentially
Sure.
boom town in China or any other country in between. So.
Yeah. I think it's really interesting when you look at the rate of urbanization that China has seen over the last 20 years, right? And then you look at a place like Indonesia, which is really not highly urbanized. And the interest that China's taken in Indonesia, it'll be interesting to see in, say, 10 or 20 years, if China ends up building high-speed rail, and if they end up helping with infrastructure, the impact that will have on the rate of urbanization in a place like Indonesia. Like was said, I think right now they're focusing on connecting those cities, but as those cities are connected, it accelerates the rate of urbanization in those connection points, as you said. So no one has done it as quickly as China. So in 2007, they had 0 kilometers of high-speed rail. By 2015, I think they had 20,000 kilometers of high-speed rail, right? And so, it's really helped people get from city to city, and it's really helped people to actually get into the cities. So I think it will have really big impacts because, as was said, I think a lot of these countries are not highly urbanized already.
Have we seen additional urbanization from their transit now to, Tibet or Nepal? Which one do they go to?
I will talk this later. I can give a personal experience on this. I came from a town that is only 1,000 people, 900 people, huge mountains everywhere. When I went to university, I need to have 7 hours from my hometown to the capital of the province. So right now, I have not been back for 10 years. Last summer I went back, it's only an hour and a half. So in the past, nobody went there, right? Just everybody, we lost a lot of population. Only older people are left in the village. But right now, last summer I went back, so that has been one of the biggest tourist place. Right outside of the airport, I saw a big sign advertising our hometown, and there's a interstate. It's like an interstate, 4 lanes, 2 lanes, and divided just directly to my hometown. And the population probably 10 times bigger. So just Dean Tikoski just mentioned, if there's no road, you build a road, then the urbanization will come along.
Well, maybe we have just one last brief comment from each one of the panelists, and then we're going to be done for the evening.
Did Wes ask one?
Go ahead. Oh, Wes, sure.
I just like that. The only thing I'd say wrong, I wish we'd had this at Boone Pickens Stadium and more people would be listening and taking notes. The reason why I say that is because one thing that's not in the mix and the discussion is the fact that in the United States we have over $22 trillion of debt. And I understand about $3 trillion of that helped by the Chinese. So there's a big player there when you're saying there's how much is a trillion. And I point that out because, thank you for the comment about the building, because when I went to Congress, we had a trade surplus. 3 years later, we had a $50 billion trade imbalance deficit, mainly the Japanese. And that's 81. 1987, I did give the speech, commencement address at Boone Pickens Stadium to Lewis Field. And I said, we have over 150 billion, and much of that, most of it, with China. 3 decades later, from 2011, we had $500 billion annual deficit, over 300 billion of that with China. Now, they're free to use that 300 billion the way they like. So when you look at 12 billion or something like that for infrastructure, that's peanuts besides of what from the imbalance. That's why you see a lot of trade's been dominating the airways the last several weeks, and they're trying to get something to get that balanced out because we owe so much. It's affected us. Now you ask a question about Australia. What does China do? And they use their money wisely. They buy coal mines in Australia. A lot of those coal mines are buying coal mines in Oklahoma and Arkansas and Kentucky in those areas. And this is something you might like to realize that right under our feet, they have over $3 billion invested in the Mississippi line. So when we drill oil in this county right here, we're also drilling oil for China. Now, that's smart. I think that's wise, investing the money that way. But that's why I built this, trying to get the money to do all the things here and trying to get our university. You know, Paul, I thought that all the faculty would get up at Louisville when I gave that commencement address and go out across the campus and change their lecture notes and get ready to do the global thing. We cannot be isolationists. We're not going back that way. We've got to prepare our people for our global world. That's their workplace. And I think the land-grant universities, that model should be, Steve, you're talking about higher education, would be a tremendous thing for us to try to carry worldwide.
You got it?
All right.
We've got a lot to do. No one listened.
We are listening. That's why we're here today.
We're here.
Yeah, great.
I agree.
All right. Tom, do you have anything, last words?
Yeah, maybe just the last sentence. I want to say the One Belt, One Road initiative is not, it's an opportunity, but not only for economic, but also for higher education and for OSU. Thank you.
Yeah. President Trump's got a 1.75 trillion on infrastructure supposed to be coming down the pike. We've got the money for it. We'll see where we
Yeah, well, China will have to find it.
That's right.
Josh?
So even I studied in China for like 20-some years. When I went back, I was really surprised. I cannot find myself where I am. So if you got the opportunity, go there and take a look and what they think to know more about the country. I always position myself. You know, I have been here for like 15 years. All my 4 kids are in US, and so it's really great for the 2 countries to working together.
Amen. Amen.
Well, I would say, you know, when I went to China a few times, I realized that all the people in Oklahoma, if they were in one city in China, it would still be a small town in China. Stephen.
I think I want to echo exactly what Tong said, that the potential scope for the Belt Road Initiative is so large that it tends to weaken the traditional way that we look at things from a siloed type perspective. And I think that highlights the need for not only OSU, but researchers across the globe to be involved in research and look at what is involved from, again, a transnational, multidisciplinary perspective. For OSU, I think that offers us a wonderful opportunity. And as Tong highlighted in his comments, a wonderful opportunity to increase our global rankings. That's where I hope we go.
Can I jump onto that? And I'll say this. I didn't go to OSU, but I went to Texas A&M University, okay? Sorry about that. But I went to a state school, okay? I've done work with the Chinese government, with the Japanese government, with many governments in Asia. And, you know, I'm just a kid from a state school in Texas who did this stuff. You guys are going to a state school in Oklahoma. That is not, nothing should hold you back from having an impact on these things, okay? Just because you go to OSU and not Harvard does not mean that you don't have a chance. To be very honest, it means you're going to have to work a lot harder, okay? You're going to have to work a lot harder. But you can be involved. You can have a seat at the table. And you have a responsibility to do that. So, you know, again, I came from a state school in Texas. We weren't well recognized as a global university when I went there. And I've had these amazing experiences overseas to do this stuff. And I think you guys can do that too.
Amen.
Let's have one more round of applause for all the speakers today. Thank you.
I really enjoyed what you said.